Welcome to the Wake and Wander podcast. This is episode 13. I want to talk about the Air India crash today and the fact that there was one survivor. Pretty crazy. It may seem like just a freak thing, but believe it or not, there have been many airline crashes in history where there was only one survivor. So I want to get in and talk about that today. First, just want to start with an in case you missed it. Curious if you guys saw this story. It was first reported at the end of May, and then the coverage continued to the beginning of this month, where they discovered that airlines were charging more for solo passengers than they were for group bookings or more than one person. For example, two people on a ticket, they would actually give a little bit of a discount versus a solo person booking a ticket. This was not something that was advertised as a deal or an incentive, let's say. This was something that the airline nerds just happened to find out and discover. A lot of these airline monitoring websites are just really, really insanely good. They do a great job of monitoring how fares are fluctuating, different valuation of points for different airlines. It was a couple of the blogs that discovered this, one called Thrifty Traveler. Noticed that a single ticket cost, for example, when they were flying United from Chicago to Peoria, cost $269, but that exact same ticket dropped to $181 per person when booking with two travelers. Another example, an American Airlines flight for this upcoming October from Charlotte, North Carolina to Fort Myers, Florida. For a one-way ticket for a single person, it was showing $422. If you change the number of passengers to two, the price per ticket dropped to $273 per person. So a difference of $150 on the ticket price. And that booking also, interestingly, allowed access to a basic economy fare for the set of dual travelers. And that was even cheaper at $263 a person, so $10 cheaper. But when you search for it on a single passenger ticket, there was no option for the basic economy fare. This wasn't true of all routes. They didn't find it to be true of all airlines, but they did find examples for Delta, American, and United where a single ticket was costing more on a per-person basis than it did for two people booking. Now, I'm sure that concept is not offensive to anyone out there, the idea of getting a group discount. And in fact, sure, I guess I'm all for it. However, this wasn't something that was advertised by the airlines. This is just something that was discovered. And when questioned about it, none of the airlines would respond. Newsweek had an article at the end of May where they say they reached out to the airlines for comment and received nothing. Then Afar magazine reached out again at the beginning of June and also noted that they had not heard back from anyone. So it was a little bit of a secret play here, and none of the reporting was able to figure out when this started. So they don't know if this has been going on for quite some time, months or years, or whether this is something that just popped up. It remains a mystery as to how long it's been going on. But they have discovered it's now happening. So what's the reasoning behind it? Well, the airlines didn't comment about it and didn't respond to requests for comment, so we can't know for sure. But the theory is that the airlines are targeting business travelers. Business travelers are typically flying solo. They're typically booking in a smaller window, so closer to their departure date. And they often, at least in the old days, had access to bigger expense accounts where the difference between $50 or $100 on the fare is not going to be that big of a deterrent, especially if they want to fly their preferred airline, versus leisure travelers who are going to be a little more selective and willing to switch airlines to save some money. So that's kind of the theory behind it. For me, it kind of pisses me off. I travel a lot for work solo. I often book in a smaller booking window. So I am sensitive to that being taken advantage of, for example. I wouldn't like that. If I'm a business traveler, I'm a frequent flyer, I am a reliable customer, why are you going to take advantage of me? If anything, maybe I should be getting a little frequency discount. You're going to give a group discount to two people traveling together. Well, how about one person that travels all the time? I don't know. I guess part of me just wishes this was never reported, because I'm the type of person that will spend a significant amount of time researching flight costs and routes. I try and always fly the same airline, American Airlines, just because I'm in their program and I've been doing it so long and I have perks with that. But I will shop around for mileage deals. I will shop around for significantly reduced fares on other airlines. And ultimately, at the end of that process, you always want to feel like you're coming out ahead. You want to feel like you've put in the time to do the research, and that research has led you to the most, if not most economical decision, then the most efficient decision, where you're getting the most bang for your buck. Sometimes it makes sense to pay more for a shorter route, for example. But now this all clouds that. Now this gives me something else that I got to obsess over. I already, when booking flights, check how much it costs in dollars, how much it costs in miles, how much it might cost if I combined miles and dollars on certain airlines, how much time am I saving on this route, etc. Now I got to change the number of passengers to make sure I'm getting the best deal. It's not something I want to do. It's not something I'm going to dwell on. It's just so like the airlines to do this, to just sneak in these price fluctuations and to just seemingly arbitrarily punish one type of traveler. It pisses me off just as a taxpayer, considering we bailed all these airlines out during the pandemic. But as we've seen, I'm not sure airlines really care about any of us individually. Just an interesting story out there. The reports are that some airlines may have already stopped this practice they're finding. So they got called out. They didn't respond to the criticism, but apparently they may have stopped some of those price gouging, let's say. Let's just call it what it is. Definitely something to keep in mind as you book your travels for this summer and fall. And if you are traveling with a friend, you may want to book on the same ticket. I always recommend doing that anyway. This way you're linked together. Should you have delays or cancellations, the airline will automatically rebook you together. But if you're used to booking your own ticket separate from your friends, you may want to check together and see if you can get a better price when booking on the same ticket. Okay, let's move on. We had one survivor on this Air India crash that happened on June 12th. More than 240 people died, and there were also people on the ground that died. Some people that were just having lunch in a cafeteria. The plane just crashed into their building. Quite sad. And in terms of probability, I'm guessing that those people had, you got to be more likely to die in the plane crash than you are to die from a plane crash hitting you on the ground. So just really sad and just kind of crazy odds on that one. The idea of there being one survivor on an airline crash is obviously a huge media buzz, a huge media story. It's very interesting. And this is not the first time this has happened. In history, there have been 8 plane crashes that have killed over 100 people that included one survivor. 8 plane crashes that have killed over 100 people that included one survivor. Most recently, it was in 2018, a 19-year-old woman survived a Cuban plane crash that killed 112 people. In 2009, a 12-year-old girl survived a crash in Yemen that took the lives of 152 people. And now this man being the sole survivor of 240 plus who had died. Now, when I was reading all this, I was really just kind of baffled by it all. I was like, okay, what would allow this guy to survive? How does one person survive when everybody else on board dies? How does that happen? How does that happen? What are the factors? So there's a great article about this from Northeastern University, actually, and it talks about the band of variables that would have to be considered to whether someone would survive or die. And these include the position of the aircraft, where you're sitting in the aircraft, the angle of impact that it has, the restraint that is used. Are you wearing your seatbelt, for example? The path of debris upon impact, projectiles coming at you, seats being uprooted, things like this. And then your path of immediate evacuation. Is there a way for you to get out of the plane once it crashes, or are you trapped inside with smoke and fire, etc.? According to the experts, this man who survived shouldn't have, in theory. He was sitting towards the front of the plane. He was actually in seat 11A. Remember that one. We'll come back to that in a second. He was in 11A. It's one of the first rows right after business or first class. So he's at the front section of economy. And typically, according to experts, sitting in the front of the plane gives you a less chance of survival upon a crash. The idea is that if you're in the back of the plane and the vessel goes down, the front is going to hit first in some capacity and can absorb some of the shock of impact and perhaps make people in the back more likely to survive. In this case, that wasn't the case. This guy was seated up in 11A. And despite the name, emergency exit row, you would think, oh, this is probably a pretty safe seat. And it is in the sense that it's close to the exit. So you're right there. But exit rows are typically positioned close to the wings or on either side of the wing, but close to them because it's easy to get out that way. You can walk onto the wing. That's just how they're built, typically designed. And that also corresponds with typically where the fuel tanks are located, et cetera. So experts are looking at this and it's so bizarre that this guy was able to survive where he was. The flight took off. It broke apart in midair. So all the circumstances of this flight just going down the way it landed, complete luck of the draw. Then he also got lucky in the sense that when it crashed and he realized it had crashed, he came to his senses. He realizes he's alive. There was an immediate path for him to get out of the plane there. The exit door, according to some of the reporting we're getting from what he said, is that had been split open. The exit door had been split open and he was able to get out. There's some incredible videos of him exiting. You can't see him exit the plane, but you see him walking off into this crowd of bystanders. Meanwhile, there's plumes of smoke and fire behind him, and he's limping out with some spots of blood on he's wearing a white t-shirt. But it's just incredible. He walks away, more or less, while everybody else had died. And here's one of the craziest things. Seat 11A. In 1998, a Thai Airways flight crashed, killed almost 150 people, and there was one survivor. And that person was also sitting in seat 11A. Kind of wild. Kind of very, very coincidental. So, as you might expect, the demand for this quote-unquote lucky seat A has been surging in the past couple weeks. A report from the New York Post says that demand for the lucky seat 11A has surged in recent days. The sharp rise comes despite aviation expert warnings that specific seat, which is next to an emergency exit, has no proven safety advantages. Like we talked about, sitting in the front of the plane is actually usually more dangerous. But people, of course, are latching onto it. Now, I should advise, just to call this seat lucky is kind of weird. I don't know how I feel about that. They put it in quotations in the article, say, oh, lucky, quote unquote. I'm not sure there's anything lucky about being the sole survivor of a plane crash. Maybe there is to some degree. I would imagine being the sole survivor in a crash like that brings some really complicated feelings, a mix of survivor's guilt and maybe some gratitude. For this gentleman on the Air India flight, I got to imagine he's not feeling so lucky. His brother was seated just a few seats away from him and died in the crash. I'd be curious to go back and interview some of these solo survivors of plane crashes and see how they feel years and decades later, if they would consider themselves lucky or not. But on we go. Let's go out to Hawaii for our next story, where I do a lot of tour guiding and lived there previously for several years. Used to run a small newspaper on the island of Oahu, so very, very familiar with the destination. And over the years, I've watched the Airbnb issue explode there. And there's some really interesting things happening with Airbnb in Hawaii that I think could be useful to you as a traveler. And it might change the way you look at Airbnb. When Airbnb first came out, it was marketed as a great thing for travelers. Not only because of convenience, where you finally had an option that was easily found and booked besides a hotel room, where you could get a place with multiple rooms, where you could have a kitchen and different amenities that hotels didn't provide, and where you could just have your own dwelling, so you weren't in a hotel with neighbors all around you. You were in a single unit, oftentimes a house, sometimes an apartment, which mirrors a hotel setting, but you weren't surrounded by other tourists all the time. The idea was that you were going to stay like a local, quote unquote. You were going to not stay at a hotel where tourists stays. You were going to stay at a local unit where travelers stay. So you could ingrain yourself, quote unquote, into the local lifestyle and be a more localized traveler, let's say. That was always the original intention. That's how it started. And even before that, you had services like couch surfing, and they all hammered this home. Don't rent a hotel and be a tourist. Stay in a local dwelling and live like a local. That's all well and good. And it's like many things, it started out with the best of intentions. However, unfortunately, as money gets involved and as people realize what a boon it could be to their finances, we started seeing Airbnb and VRBO take a different turn. The premise was always been still the same. Rent a local place and stay there. However, what's changed has been the hosts, people that are renting out their places to visitors. Originally, at least in theory, the idea was with couch surfing and Airbnb where come and stay with me. Come and rent out my extra bedroom, rent out my basement. Come and stay with me and you'll get a feel of the local experience. Then it kind of went to, I'm going away for the weekend and I won't be in my house. So come stay in my house so you can feel like you're living as a local would. Now what Airbnb is I own a property in Hawaii, but I live in Colorado. So go out and stay in my Hawaii house and you'll feel what it's like to be a local. And there's still some truth to that. And there's obviously benefits to what you get to staying in that situation. So even for a while, that was okay. But now what you have are groups of homeowners who are severely altering the course of destinations. Now you have places all over the world where people own property. They don't live there. They're not from there, but they rent out their place on Airbnb to help pay their mortgage and pay for the property. Sometimes it's a situation where someone owns a single condo, a single house. They live elsewhere full time, but they rent out. Other times, people own multiple properties, as we'll see in this Hawaii story coming up. Sometimes people own 5, 6 different vacation rentals that they manage in a destination that maybe they live there because they manage it, but they're obviously expanding their empire. So let's take a look at what's happening in Hawaii on the island of Maui. This past month, there have been several community meetings regarding a new bill put forth by Maui's mayor to limit the number of Airbnbs that can be on the island. This battle has taken place across Hawaii, most recently on the island of Oahu. Several years ago, it was a free-for-all. You could have vacation rentals in any part of the island as long as you had them properly registered. Then they went ahead and changed it to only being able to have Airbnbs in specific zones. And we see this across the world now where vacation rentals are being limited to certain neighborhoods, to certain areas that cater to visitors. And what they're trying to do is get those vacation rentals out of community and local neighborhoods, which are just breaking apart these local neighborhoods and really leading to a lack of affordable housing. That's the key here. When you have vacation rentals in local neighborhoods, those properties become worth more, not only their value overall, but how much they could be rented for. Why would anybody, for example, I remember when I first moved to Oahu and I was looking for lodging, I was looking for an apartment to rent, and so many of the coolest places I found would not rent long-term to local people because they could make more money running it as a short-term vacation rental, renting it out to tourists. They could make as much in 3 to 5 days as they could renting it to me for 1 month. It's not hard to envision the problem that quickly becomes for local people who, and not just someone like me who's moving to Hawaii. My story is trivial compared to someone. Imagine if you grew up in Hawaii, you want to buy your own house, you want to stay there and to see your family. And Hawaii is such a unique destination, guys. This is not like, oh, I grew up in Philly and I'm moving to New York and I can still drive an hour to see my family. There's not a lot of options. Once you're on the island, you're either there or you leave. And when you leave, you go to the mainland, which is a 5, 6, 7 hour flight away and might cost you $500 to $1,000 to get there. So it's a little more of a higher stakes than what we've seen elsewhere in the world. Other places have a little more dynamic nature to them where people have more options within a driving radius or within a reasonable radius around. This was highlighted, if you guys remember the fires that took place in the summer of 2023. The lack of affordable housing has long been a problem for Maui and all of Hawaii, but the fire that destroyed Lahaina really put that back into the center of attention for people because so many homes were destroyed during the fire. You had thousands and thousands and thousands of residents who were displaced, living in hotels for over a year. There was nowhere to put them. There was no affordable housing to put them in. And at that time, I remember there were discussions where the government was incentivizing or trying to incentivize people that owned short-term vacation rentals to convert them to long-term housing. And to do that, they had to pay them an extreme amount of money. There was units that were 3, 4 bedrooms that were being rented out for $5,000 a month, something like this. And the government was just paying the bill for this. And that was the only way to get these homeowners to invite local people in. That's the situation the island found itself in. And this month, there have been several community meetings leading up to the vote on this bill put forth by the mayor to limit the number of short-term vacation rentals on Maui. And I just want to go through some of this news coverage and some of the quotes we're hearing from people just to give you guys an idea. For us, when you're not involved in this and you're a traveler and you love staying at Airbnbs and you love the options, it's just very easy to fall in love with it. And why not? I've stayed in many Airbnbs. I love the flexibility, etc. But it would be wrong if I didn't acknowledge some of the problems it was creating. So let's look into some of this. Take this, for example. On June 9th, they had the first community meeting about this. You had overflow crowds that turned out to debate the vacation rental phase-out bill. And you had a lot of community organizations there. And here are some of the signs that were being carried by these people. A couple said, Maui people first. A couple said, homes, not vacation rentals. Another one was fresh out of Aloha for short-term rentals. The main point that most of these people were making was that Hawaii continues to favor tourists over locals. This problem of housing has been around so long, and people just refuse to deal with it because there's so much interest in making money off the tourism industry, and there's so much interest in growing the tourism industry. And this is just a continuation of that, where local people, even after this big fire, have been displaced, and there's still no aloha for the local people. It's all about making sure the tourists are happy and making sure the tourism stakeholders can make money off the tourists. And they're pointing a lot of this out. And you read the articles, I'll post some of them in the description. It's just very heartfelt. It's very sad. And it's easy to gloss over, but if you put yourself in their shoes, where you grew up somewhere and now not only can you not afford to buy a house because real estate has gotten so expensive, but you can't even afford to rent an apartment. Maybe a lot of us listening feel that way about wherever we live, just in the sense that cost of living is so high in New York City or in Philadelphia or in California. Right? That makes, we understand that cost of living goes up, real estate goes up, etc. But imagine living in a place where you know that your cost of living is unaffordable, specifically because your home state or city is just catering to visitors more than they're catering to you. This is the problem that many people are beginning to have with tourism. They feel like the people that operate their cities and destinations only care about worshiping the almighty tourism dollar and don't really necessarily have the local people as the priority. It's sad more so when you hear some of the arguments from the other side. This is how the tourism industry keeps doing what it's doing without any sort of check or balance. And this is why we're seeing protests all over the world for over-tourism. I was just on a podcast recently and was discussing this idea. Someone was asking me, tourism, all these small towns in America now are just becoming, especially out west, becoming overrun with tourists, and it's just totally changing the dynamic of these places. The host I was speaking with lived in Whitefish, Montana, and Montana is having a lot of issues now, especially after the pandemic. A lot of people doing road trips now, wanting to move out to these rural areas, and it's completely changing the face of these once really small destinations. And yeah, life goes on. You can't prevent progress. You can't prevent someone from coming to want to move to a beautiful place. But even where I live in western Colorado, we just see in the summer, the tourists come and everything accommodates to them. The economy is based around that. And this is why it's a problem. Once you let that travel genie out of the bottle, you can't go backwards. You cannot build an economy based on tourism and then have it become stagnant or not grow. You can't, as a political operative in a place, introduce tourism, encourage your residents to start businesses, and then turn around in a few years and say, well, actually, we're gonna limit the number of people that come, or we're not going to push for more economic income, because your stakeholders are not going to stand for it, especially in a place like Hawaii where you have these big corporations that come in and invest millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. It doesn't work. And here's a perfect example of how they do. They try and play these emotional heartstrings about why it's so important to continue on with tourism. And they use the economy as the quote unquote excuse or reason behind it. We saw this with the Lahaina fires. All the local people were grieving. Thousands of structures were destroyed. More than 100 people lost their lives. And it felt like a week or two didn't go by when the economic drumbeat started. We got to have people coming back. The economy depends on it. We can't just sit around. Got to have people come back. I know your son died a week ago, but we got to have people come back. This is the mentality. And the arguments they make is that if we don't have people come back, then I know your son died, but now your daughter's not going to have a job. So what do you want for her? This is what we get into. Here you go. Speaking about the mayoral bill on Maui that would limit the short-term rentals. Many people will be hurt by this bill. One man who manages 6 short-term rentals said. He cited an example of a cleaner who earns around $10,000 a month from his rentals, adding, "This bill will devastate both of us. She has children and says she'll leave Maui if this bill passes." He estimated that 1,000 jobs for condo cleaners could be lost. First off, should we all just move to Hawaii and make $10,000 a month cleaning Airbnbs? Sign me up. That sounds pretty good. But notice the heartstring on that. This poor cleaner, her children, she's going to have to leave Maui. It's kind of wild, right? Like what a what a funny argument to make to local people. Hey, you can't afford a house and you have to leave the island. Your uncle's left, your sister's leaving. But man, if we pass this bill, my cleaner, she's going to lose her $10,000 a month job. She's going to have to leave. She has kids. You can't do that to her. It's kind of wild. Good for him. Look, I'm not saying his name. It's in the articles here, whatever, but I'm not trying to pick on him. But this kind of rhetoric, come on. Like, this will crush the local economy, he said. Devastating. The majority of small businesses on South Kihei Road and adjacent to South Kihei Road, they rely on these Airbnb guests to come. What about them? I don't really see how we can make this argument with a straight face. You're literally causing the exact thing you're arguing for, right? You're saying you can't shut this down because it's going to force people out of work and force them to leave the island. Meanwhile, 6 vacation rentals and won't rent them out to a reasonable price to local people are causing people to leave the island. It's just this circular logic that goes around and around and around. And all hail the mighty economic dollar. It doesn't matter if locals leave the island. They're not spending money. Who cares? The tourists are the ones that got to come. My cleaner, she's got kids. Come on, she's got to make $10,000 a month, man. Cost of living in Hawaii is high. What are you going to do that to her? It's just amazing that some people will say this crap in public. Here's another one. One woman argued that limiting the number of vacation rentals would, quote, simply pull the rug out from an already vulnerable and very interconnected community, further damaging our struggling economy. Another one said that tourism is our lifeblood on Maui, and this guy manages many short-term rentals and has a staff of 24 to 70 contractors, independent contractors, and they all depend on these condos to pay their bills, he said. Guys, I'm just tired of this argument. I really am. I would have a lot more respect for these people if they just stood up and said, I bought my house fair and square. I'm allowed to have a short-term vacation rental, and I'm doing it because I can make money off of it and improve my situation. Just say that. Just say that. Stop getting up there and warning of dire economic consequences when there's already dire economic consequences of what you're doing. Do you think that these people are just making it up that they can't afford a place? This is what they're actually living in very affordable places, but they're coming and protesting this? It's just silly. You're arguing that there's going to be a problem when there's already a problem. So come to the table with an honest approach and try and work on the situation. Try and find a way to make it better. This doom and gloom outlook is just so boring. What are you talking about? Your housekeeper's going to lose their $10,000 a month salary? It's really sad. Let's look at some quotes from the other side, because I just think it's important to hear this. Now, again, I'm not against Airbnb. I've stayed in them. I'll probably stay in them again. I get it. But I'm going to be much more aware of the communities that I'm coming into now, because a lot of this stuff is just really sad. People who are supporting the bill that would reduce or eliminate short-term rentals, They point to the original intent of the zoning and the desperate need for residential inventory. They see the bill as prioritizing community needs over transient tourism accommodations. If we don't act now, one woman said, the real cost of losing is our people, our culture, and our Maui. Every time someone is priced out, it's not just a statistic, it's a story. It's a piece of our village. It's a broken lineage. We must stop expecting housing to deliver killer investments. We need to unravel decades of policy that sacrificed our working class in the name of profit. Maui does not exist to serve someone's investment portfolio. Maui is not a playground. This is our home, and it's time we take it back. And get this, they point out that in Maui, 85% of the vacation rental owners live off island. 85% don't live in Maui County. Think about that for a second. And then think about the arguments these people are making, these doom and gloom predictions about how impacted the economy will be without them when 85% don't even live in the destination. Pretty wild. Lots of really interesting stuff in these articles. I'll post it with the episode description, but just something to chew on. I'm not saying don't stay at Airbnbs. I'm not saying that. But I do wonder if things would be easier and less complicated for the communities if we were a little closer to the original purpose of the couch surfing and the Airbnb in the beginning, when it was more about just renting out an extra bedroom, not something you would even put a long-term guest in. You're going away for the weekend. You want to rent your house out. Things like this make total sense as an economic boost and as a help for people. It creates jobs, but it's not a situation where you have a lot of foreign investors coming in, buying up property, and just renting them out in tourist destinations. We'll see what happens there. Now, let's finish up on a brighter note here, if we can. Have you guys seen the documentary Poop Cruise on Netflix? If you haven't, and you're looking for a mindless night of entertainment and a little bit of a travel nightmare horror story scenario, I recommend you checking it out. It's the story of a Carnival cruise ship back in 2013, and it was one of the most bizarre cruises ever. Essentially what happened was it was supposed to be a 4 or 5 day cruise, and they set out into the Gulf of Mexico, and almost immediately the ship's power was shut down, and a fault also caused the toilets and the plumbing to malfunction and overflow into the rooms and throughout the ship. You can imagine the chaos this caused. It actually resulted in all the guests having to leave their guest room, set up their mattresses in the hallway, etc. I don't want to give away too much because it's a sight to be seen, let's say. Aside from the drama and seeing the horrific conditions these passengers go through, another interesting part of it is the payout at the end and what happened to these passengers once they got through this. Eventually, they got back to land, and Carnival offered them some key forms of compensation for their experience. They refunded them for the cruise. They gave them a reimbursement for their travel expenses to get back home. They gave them a one-time $500 cash payment, so they got $500 cash. They also got a future cruise voucher, which, after you guys see the documentary, you pretty much guarantee that nobody who was on that ship will ever be going on a cruise again. Funny enough, people tried to sue, and this was a part of the documentary where they had a couple lawyers on. Some people had tried to sue Carnival for the experience and get further damages. But interestingly enough, when you go on a cruise, you buy the ticket, you agree to the terms and conditions of the ticket. Well, nobody really was aware of this before it was put to test in law, but there is a clause in Carnival's ticket policy, and it says, quote, Carnival makes absolutely no guarantee for safe passage, a seaworthy vessel, adequate and wholesome food, and sanitary and safe living conditions. That was an actual line on the cruise ticket agreement, which is just so insane and just so corporate travel-esque. Just complete denial of responsibility and accountability. Insane. Check it out. It's called Trainwreck Poop Cruise on Netflix if you're looking for a mindless evening. Thank you all so much for listening to the episode. If you have thoughts or feelings, you can get in touch with me, will@wakeandwander.com. You can find me online at wakeandwanderwill. That's all for now. We will see you next time.
Yes, now I'm riding the terrain, flying high up once again. Got my crew sitting healthy and my boo living wealthy. Level 99, never settle in my mind. So I pedal and I climb up the pedestal and find almighty weapon. So I calm, lightly step into the castle. Satchel, tackled, wrestled down the corridor where I'm grounded through the floor. Roundhouse into my core, down, out, and through the door. Sword down at my side, I gotta round up and ride. Face boss, break jaws till I take off. Face off, stop and swing my serious strike. This is it, take the title, disappear in the night. To the whole wide world. Got the keys to the kingdom overseas with the wisdom guarantee that my rhythm hit the whole wide world. Slay the boss in the castle when we cross final battle. Then I walk out, travel to the whole wide world. Got the keys to the kingdom overseas with the wisdom guarantee that my rhythm hit the whole wide world. Slay the boss in the castle when we cross final battle. Then I walk out, travel.